Purpose of this training is to learn how to close out a project in regards to invoicing, reconciling, and requesting a debrief call with clients. This process includes sending a cost confirmation to a client, taking the steps needed in Salesforce to reconcile, and create an invoice. And lastly, we'll touch on what accounting does on their side in regards to invoicing. The project close process begins when a client confirms that all quotas are met and the data collection is complete. At this point, the client is likely reviewing the data on their side to ensure that there's no additional sampling needed. Sometimes we might have to go back into field if a client identifies respondents that they would consider poor quality and need to be replaced. Examples of this would be if a respondent provided gibberish open ends to some questions in the survey. Another example of this would be a speeder. A speeder is someone who quickly goes through the survey. Typically, we consider a speeder 1/3 of the average LOI. Another example would be a straightliner. This is someone who provides the same answer to a grid question in the survey. Once the client is satisfied with the final data set, we will then ask them to send over the final RIDs of the good completes they will be using. This is typically sent in Excel or text file. When we receive this data set, you will want to ensure that the number of completes the client sends is close to the number of completes we're showing in Fulcrum. This is typical for a client to toss about 8% of the overall data due to quality concerns. But anything higher than that should be addressed with the client directly. If you're seeing a discrepancy over 15%, you should ask the client for the IDs that they tossed out and the reasons for each toss. From there, you will want to send this spreadsheet to Partner Ops for them to follow up with each supplier directly. Using the number of final IDs that the client sent you, you will then create a cost confirmation for your client to approve. This cost confirmation is a preview of what they should expect on the invoice. You cannot invoice a project unless the client confirms the costs via email. The next section of this video will show you the reconciliation process. Reconciling is the process of telling Fulcrum what completes the client is willing to pay for and what completes the client will not be using due to quality concerns. The reconciliation process for managed services takes place in Salesforce. Listed on your screen here are the steps to reconcile and the steps to invoice in Salesforce. Feel free to pause the video to review these steps more carefully if you would like, but we'll walk through them together using our example. First, navigate to the opportunity in Salesforce and select Invoice Groups. From there, click Create Invoice. This will show you the project name that will display on the invoice and also allow you to include a PO number. The next step is how you reconcile the applicable surveys. Put a check in the box to select all projects and then click Reconcile. In the pop-up, paste all applicable RIDs from your client, and then you'll click Reconcile. This page shows you exactly how much completes you're reconciling out. So for example, we're seeing 8% will be removed. This is industry standard. The system will then tell you once all RIDs are reconciled, and you can click OK. Once you are done reconciling, you will scroll up and click the Next button. Here is where you will create the line items for your invoice that mimic the cost confirmation the client approved. Next, you'll click Save at the very top. From there, you'll go back to the invoice to send it to Ready to Invoice status. Please note that once you change the status to Ready to Invoice, the invoice will be locked and you won't be able to edit this. So why is this important? RTI refers to Ready to Invoice, which is the days between the last complete date in Fulcrum and the day the invoice was sent to accounting. Once an invoice is placed in RTI status, the typical turnaround for an invoice to reach a client is 24 to 48 hours. The accounting process. Each afternoon, the finance team pulls a report for those studies that are in RTI status. They will then review the invoice against the data in Fulcrum and create an invoice. By default, the primary client project manager will receive a copy of the invoice. This is also important because they will also receive a copy of the CSAT survey requesting feedback on their experience with our team. If you need to add an additional invoice recipient, you can do so in Salesforce, and this is how. Step 1, inside the opportunity, scroll down to the right-hand side to Contact Roles. Select the drop-down arrow and click Manage Contact Roles. Type the recipient's name and select Invoice Recipient for the contact role, and then you'll click Save. We also have some PBI reports that are helpful to show which projects are outstanding and need to be invoiced. That concludes today's training on how to close out a project and invoice a client.